Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Matthew chapter 20, verses 29 through chapter 21, verse 22. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed them. 2 blind men were sitting by the road. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David." The crowd scolded them to get them to be quiet. But they shouted even more loudly, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." Jesus stopped, called them, and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Now, when they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, telling them, "Go to the village ahead of you. Right away you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you are to say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. "Tell the people of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, unassuming and seated on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So the disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed the cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road. Others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those following kept shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" As he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was thrown into an uproar, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." Then Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all those who were selling and buying in the temple courts, and turned over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. And he said to them, "It is written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer,' but you are turning it into a den of robbers." The blind and lame came to him in the temple courts, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the experts in the law saw the wonderful things he did, and heard the children crying out in the temple courts, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they became indignant, and said to him, "Do you hear what they are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, 'Out of the mouths of children and nursing infants you have prepared praise for yourself'?" And leaving them, he went out of the city to Bethany and spent the night there. Now early in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry. After noticing a fig tree by the road, he went to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. He said to it, "Never again will there be fruit from you." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" Jesus answered them, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, if you believe, you will receive." Yeah, so you have Jesus leaving Jericho here. Which I didn't even realize that they were in Jericho prior to this, but I guess they were. And then you have 2 blind men who come to Jesus and ask for their sight, and Jesus heals them. Then you have the triumphal entry there, which is interesting in that, well, for multiple reasons, but you have Jesus sending his disciples to go and get a donkey tied there with a colt, and if anyone says anything to you, you are to say, "The Lord needs them," and he will send them at once. So it's interesting to me that you have these claims to divinity scattered throughout, like the Gospels, and that rather than like just come out and say it, though there are places where it's basically just come out and said, you have all of these things that wouldn't necessarily make any sense unless Jesus was God. And like this particular instance, the Lord needs them, indicating that it's He that already owns the donkey and the colt. And just, I need use of them at the moment type thing. Because you have other passages like the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to the Lord. And so too you have here this donkey and this colt that also belong to Him. Also, you have at the end there, well, towards the end, 21:15, the chief priests and the experts in the law saw the wonderful things He did and heard the children crying out in the temple courts, "Hosanna to the Son of David." They became indignant and said to Him, "Do you hear what they are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, 'Out of the mouths of children and nursing infants you have prepared praise for yourself'?" So Jesus is asserting this for Himself, but in order to be the person prophesied in the scripture, He would have to be God, because out of the mouths of children and nursing infants you have prepared praise for yourself. That is, in this passage it's indicated that the one who's prepared praise did so ahead of time in the mouths of children and nursing infants, and He did it for Himself. So, yeah. Indicating that He must have, that He's asserting to be the one who prepared the praise for Himself. Another interesting thing, when Jesus goes in and cleanses the temple, He turns over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, which was listening to Anthony Rogers, and he words are hard this morning, brought up the reference to the jobs of the Levitical priests. And one of the jobs of the Levitical priests was to check the houses if there was like uncleanness in them. Like in this case, it was like mold spots. And if there was a mold spot, he was to tear it out and then wait a period of time and come back later and see if the mold spot had grown. And then if the mold spot had grown, I think, like, either tear it out again or condemn the house to be disassembled. So it's interesting here, Jesus in the temple courts is functioning somewhat in that way, being a priest in the temple, tearing out the uncleanness. And some people have a problem with Jesus coming twice to the temple, but this was consistent with the Levitical priest's duty to see if the corruption grows. So, yeah. Let's see what Guzik has to say. Jesus, in the previous chapter, says, "What do you want me to do for you?" This is a wonderful, simple question God has not stopped asking. Sometimes we go without when God would want to give us something simply because we will not answer this question. And we do not have because we do not ask. Jesus asked this question with full knowledge that these men were blind. He knew what they needed and what they wanted, but God still wants us to tell him our needs as a constant expression of our trust and reliance on him. When they drew near Jerusalem, Jesus knew that the religious leaders were going to arrest him and condemn him and mock him and scourge him and deliver him to the Romans for crucifixion. Yet he had the courage to not only enter Jerusalem, but to enter it in as public a way as possible. This contrasts to his previous pattern of suppressing publicity. If Jesus had not deliberately suppressed the popular enthusiasm over him and his credentials as Messiah, if Jesus had wanted it, this would have happened long ago and many times. The applause in the crowds were not manipulated. They would have occurred in any case, but the ride on a colt, because it was planned, could only be an acted parable, a deliberate act of self-disclosure. Secrecy was being lifted. You will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Jesus would ride upon the younger of these animals, the colt. He told the disciples how they would find these animals and instructed them to bring both animals. In the midst of this excited crowd, an unbroken animal remains calm under the hands of the Messiah who controls nature. Mark tells us that the colt had never been ridden, so that it would be only prudent to bring its mother as well to reassure it among the noisy crowd. They laid their clothes on them, spreading their clothes on the road. Others cut down branches from the trees and spread them on the road. All this was done to honor Jesus as a great, triumphant person coming into Jerusalem in the season of Passover. The act of spreading out of the garment was one of recognition, loyalty, and a promise of support. Carrying palm and other branches were emblematic of victory and success. In one way, this crowd was glorious. It is a mark of Christ's presence when the church becomes enthusiastic. We sometimes hear complaints about revivals being too exciting. Perhaps the censure is deserved, but I would like to see a little of the fault. This age does not generally sin in the direction of being too excited concerning divine things. We've erred so long on the other side that perhaps a little excess in the direction of fervor might not be the worst of all calamities. At any rate, I would not fear to try it, says Spurgeon. In another way, this crowd was ridiculous in worldly eyes. Why, if Pilate himself had heard about it, he would have said, there's nothing much to fear from that. There's no fear that that man will ever upset Caesar. There's no fear that he will ever overturn an army. Where are their swords? There's not a sword among them. They have no cries that sound like rebellion. Their songs are only some religious verses taken out of the Psalms. Oh, says he, the whole thing is contemptible and ridiculous. Hosanna to the Son of David. This was open messianic adoration of Jesus. They took to Jesus for salvation. Hosanna means save now, and was addressed to kings. They openly give Jesus the title appropriate for the Messiah. Vox populi, vox Dei. They used to say, but the saying is false. The voice of the people may seem to be the voice of God when they shout, Hosanna in the highest. But whose voice is it when they yell out, crucify him, from Spurgeon? He drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple. This seems distinct from the cleansing of the temple courts mentioned in John 2, which happened towards the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry. Yet the purpose was the same, to drive out the merchants who, in cooperation with the priests, cheated visitors to Jerusalem by forcing them to purchase approved sacrificial animals and currencies at high prices. Barclay noted a pair of doves could cost as little as 4 pence outside the temple, and as much as 75 pence inside the temple. This is almost 20 times more expensive. The blind and the lame came to him. The blind and the lame were restricted to the court of the Gentiles. They could not go closer to the temple and could not go to the altar to sacrifice. After purging the court of the Gentiles of merchants and robbers, Jesus then ministered to the outcasts who congregated there. And he healed them. After driving out the money changers and the merchants from the temple courts, Jesus didn't establish the society for the cleansing of the temple. He got back to doing the business of the Messiah, a significant part of which was showing the power of God in the context of compassion and mercy. And then Jesus rebukes the fig tree. Let no fruit grow on you ever again. In a dramatic way, Jesus performed one of his few destructive miracles. His curse made the fig tree to wither away. Found nothing on it but leaves. This explains why Jesus did this destructive miracle. Essentially, the tree was a picture of false advertising, having leaves but no figs. This should not be the case with these particular fig trees, which customarily did not bear leaves apart from figs. In this acted-out parable, Jesus warned of coming judgment upon an unfruitful Israel. It showed God's disapproval of people who are all leaves and no fruit. The story is clear and simple, and its point obvious, that what counts is not promise, but performance. And whatever things you ask in prayer, believing you will receive. This promise of God's answer to the prayer of faith was made to disciples, not to the multitude. This is a promise to those who are following Jesus. Nothing is too big for true faith to obtain, but that faith must have a promise to lean upon. We can only believe for a thing when we are in such union with God that his thought and purpose can freely flow into us, suggesting what we should pray for, and leading us to that point in which there is perfect sympathy and understanding between us and the divine mind. Faith is always the product of such a frame as this. Carrying on. Psalm chapter 25, verses 16 through 22. Turn toward me and have mercy on me, for I am alone and oppressed. Deliver me from my distress. Rescue me from my suffering. See my pain and suffering. Forgive all my sins. Watch my enemies, for they outnumber me. They hate me and want to harm me. Protect me and deliver me. Please do not let me be humiliated, for I have taken shelter in you. May integrity and godliness protect me, for I rely on you. O God, rescue Israel from all their distress. Some 1,000 years before Paul, David lived what the Apostle Paul would write at 2 Corinthians 4, 8 through 10. We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed, always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. And finally, Proverbs chapter 6, verses 12 through 15. A worthless and wicked person walks around saying perverse things. He winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, and points with his fingers. He plots evil with perverse thoughts in his heart. He spreads contention at all times. Therefore his disaster will come suddenly. In an instant he will be broken, and there will be no remedy. Solomon did not directly attribute this calamity, or breaking, to the judgment of God, but it is implied. God knows how to set the cynical, crooked-speaking man or woman in their deserved place. Walks with a perverse mouth. One of the main features of the worthless and wicked person's manner of life is the corruption of his speech. He has a perverse mouth, which mainly has the idea of crooked or corrupt, more than what we would think of as a moral perversion. What he says isn't straight, honest, and right. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.